She is a true rock and roll rebel, and she was at the pinnacle of rock in the Bay Area of San Francisco for 4 decades. And she got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. She certainly is somebody to love. Yeah, we're talking about Grace Slick. So let's go ask Alice what the dormouse said. And let's drop the needle. Grace Barrett Wing was born in Highland Park, which is a suburb of Chicago, but her family moved around a lot. So they ended up in Northern California. And then she did a stint in a college, which we'll hear about in a minute. But it was in 1965 that she discovered the Jefferson Airplane in San Francisco. And Grace and her husband at that time, Jerry Slick, decided to form their own band, which they called the Great Society. And actually, while she was in the Great Society, Grace recorded 2 songs that, of course, everybody knows, Somebody to Love and White Rabbit. But in 1966, Sing Anderson, who was the lead singer of the Jefferson Airplane, decided to quit the band. So the band asked Grace if she would like to join. Of course she did. And they very quickly then re-recorded Somebody to Love and White Rabbit, which became their biggest hits. With the Jefferson Airplane, Grace Slick recorded 7 albums, but I'll cover those when we talk about the Jefferson Airplane in a separate episode. During her heady trip with the Jefferson Airplane, Grace Slick received an invitation in the mail from her college. Remember, we talked about that earlier. The Alumni Association of Finch College sent out an invitation to Grace Barrett Wing, because that was a name that she had when she was in college, and invited her to their college reunion, which actually was going to happen, at all places, at the White House, because Richard Nixon's daughter, Tricia, also went to Finch College the same time that Grace was there. Well, Grace couldn't let this pass by. She was definitely going to go, but she needed an escort. So who do you think she invited to go with her? Of course, that radical Abbie Hoffman. So the 2 of them cooked up this plan that they were going to go to the White House and they were going to slip LSD into Richard Nixon's drink. What a trip that would have been. But when they arrived at the White House, the security was not going to let Abbie Hoffman in because this was a female-only event. Well, then Grace got incensed, so she decided not to go. So Dick Nixon missed his drink. The Jefferson Airplane split up in 1970 when Jorma Kaukonen and Jack Cassidy decided to form Hot Tuna. Now, at the time, Grace was living with Paul Kantner, so the 2 of them decided, we'll record albums together. And they did. In 1970, they released Blows Against the Empire, which was a concept album which combined Kantner's vision of sci-fi with the fact that Grace was pregnant. The songs are pretty strong anti-establishment, but give a listen to Mau Mau American, The Baby Tree, A Child Is Coming, Hijack, and Have You Seen the Stars Tonight? The next year, 1971, sees Paul and Grace doing it again when they released their second album, which is called Sunfighter. This album has an all-star lineup including Papa John Creech, Jack Cassidy, David Crosby, Jorma Kaukonen, Graham Nash, and The Tower of Power. And the album cover shows Paul and Grace's daughter, China. Listen to Silver Spoon, Sunfighter, Diana 1 and 2, and China. But Paul and Grace were nowhere near done. The following year in 1972, they released another album, and this one is called Baron von Tollbooth and the Chrome Nun, which were the nicknames given to Paul and Grace by none other than David Crosby. Now, this is not one of my favorite albums of theirs, but there are some songs to listen to, like Ballad of the Chrome Nun, Your Mind Has Left Your Body, and Sketches of China. But 2 years later, in 1974, Grace decides, hey, I think I'll do my own solo album. And so she releases a provocatively titled album called Manhole. She was joined by a host of guests, including Paul Kantner, of course, David Freeberg, David Crosby, Jack Cassidy, and even the London Symphony Orchestra. The album was conceived as a soundtrack for a movie called Manhole, which was never made, and the script kind of has vanished. Listen to the theme from the movie Manhole. It's only music, better lying down, and epic number 38. Unfortunately for Grace, her first solo album was a flop. But Grace was never one to let bad things get her down. That same year, her and Paul decided, hey, let's form a new group, and we'll call it Jefferson Starship. And they did, and they released the first of 11 albums, Dragonfly, which was a big hit. Now, I'll talk about the Jefferson Starship again in a separate episode. Because the Jefferson Starship got in the way, it took Grace 6 years to release her second solo album, which was called Dreams. And this one is considered her best. Standout tracks are Dreams and Seasons, and the album reached number 32 on the charts. The next year, 1981, she releases another solo album, which is Welcome to the Wrecking Ball, and this is right before she decides to rejoin Jefferson Starship. Listen to Sea of Love, Mistreater, and Wrecking Ball. Then, in 1983, Grace decides to rejoin Paul Kantner for his album Planet Earth Rock and Roll Orchestra. This is the last record the two of them will ever record together. And then the very next year, in 1984, Grace decides to release another solo album, and it's called Software. And although it did have a hit, All the Machines on it, the album itself was a failure. It only went to number 206 on the chart. Grace was still active with the Jefferson Starship, but by 1988 she decided she'd had enough, so she quit the band. But she did come back the next year, in 1989, for a reunion. But shortly thereafter, the Jefferson Starship evaporated. Now, Grace has been very vocal about aging. And according to Wikipedia, she said, all rock and rollers over the age of 50 look stupid and they should retire. And so she did. But I kind of think that Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Paul McCartney aren't paying much attention to that quote. Grace had other interests, and she started painting, and then she wrote an autobiography, Somebody to Love, which I've read, and it's a great read, and in typical Grace Slick fashion, not backing away from anything, being candid, being a little provocative, she actually describes in pretty much detail her lovemaking with Jim Morrison of the Doors. Grace Slick was one of the early female rock and roll stars, and she had an amazing life and an incredible career. She had many hits. She played Woodstock. She had a solo career. She flew high both with the Jefferson Airplane and the Jefferson Starship. And she collaborated with Paul Kantner not only on some pretty memorable music, but on creating an amazing daughter, China. Wow. So to answer Grace's question, don't we want somebody to love? Of course we do. Thanks, Grace, for all the memories. Thank you for watching, and keep a rockin'. If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.